I know most men don't speak of such things. I'm sorry that I'm not more gentle with you, darling. It's just that I've grown accustomed to the lives of men bleeding out in front of me on the deck of a ship. I'm not very good at being respectable. I say things I shouldn't. Clearly, he gestured between their bodies, I've done things I shouldn't. That comment made the lingering taste of his kiss upon her lips turn bitter. I understand. She raised her chin, trying with every shaking breath not to let him see that his words were stabbing her heart to pieces. I am a mistake. With a low growl, he tossed the bloody handkerchief on the floor and scowled at her. That's not all what I meant, and you know that. He paused, his heated gaze turned soft, and he lowered his voice, smoothing out the gruffness. I meant that I've wronged you, Gemma, not the other way around. We both know that you being with me here, agreeing to let me have you, has ruined what little chance you had of marriage with anyone. Not just James. The weight of those unsaid words burned her straight through like a blazing fire on dry tinder. What was she supposed to do now? Live the rest of her life alone with her parents? She'd never defined herself by marriage, still didn't. Living as a spinster might have been something she could have tolerated before she'd been with Jasper. Now she wanted things. Dark, wonderful, powerful things, and a spinster wouldn't get a chance to experience that pleasure ever again. But you and I... She dared not ask him to do the proper thing and propose to her. She couldn't marry Jasper, even if he wanted her to. She couldn't be with a man she'd been forced to marry due to their circumstances. He would despise her for such an entrapment, and she couldn't bear to have him hate her too. Gemma, you and James have just called off your understanding. Now isn't the time to be thinking about anyone else. You need time to heal your heart. His sigh seemed heart-heavy, and she couldn't help but wonder what made him believe that. The handsome features of his eyes and mouth seemed to darken with a grim resignation. Swallowing the lump in her throat, she nodded. I suppose that's it then. We go our separate ways. I should fix my appearance before I return to the party. Gemma found her strength returning to her, and with trembling hands she checked her gown. Thankfully, it was unmarred by dirt or blood. She'd been lucky. He returned to his knees, once more lifting her gown, but this time he only touched her ankles, prying away the brittle briars which had lodged into her stockings during her flight from him. His gentle touch made her both hate and adore him at the same time. How could this man make her feel such wild extremes? When he got to his feet again, he stared at her for a long moment. The sunlight coming through the windows of the garden shed seemed to fill the room with heat, and she knew a blush crept up her neck to her cheeks. A century seemed to span between them, coloured with 1,000 thoughts that passed between their eyes, along with the hints of words upon their lips that went unspoken. Everything was full of promise, yet tinged with a sense of desperation and melancholy she couldn't understand. Without a word, he wrapped his arms around her waist and tugged her up against the length of his body. He buried his face in the groove between her neck and shoulder, with lips pressed tenderly against her skin while he held her. The shock of his sudden embrace had her tensing for several long heartbeats before she finally relaxed. Gemma touched him back, tentatively at first. After a few seconds, the pressure of his hands on her back made her feel feminine and protected. She'd never thought a man's embrace would make her feel like this, or that she'd enjoy it so much. It wasn't that she felt weak or fragile. She simply felt safe in his arms. The way he held her, with such desperate pressure, made her feel like he was trying to erase all the ways he'd hurt her that day, as if his arms alone could protect her from whatever would come next. Silly, She knew to think that, because the moment they left the shed, her world would shatter all over again. But here, now, it was easy to forget that the world around them existed. The idea that life continued outside these small dusty walls of the shed was impossible. The only thing that really mattered to her was what she'd just experienced with Jasper. The pleasure of that spirited union when she surrendered her innocence to him, and then his desire to hold her, the clash of tempers. All of it had been worth it, to feel such an enchanting moment of bliss within his arms and the sweet taste of his mouth against hers. But even the strongest spells could be broken. Just tell me the truth, Jasper. It was you in the garden last night, wasn't it? She needed to be sure it was him. She had to hear him say it. When he touched her, kissed her here in the garden shed, it had been just like the man who'd come to her in the garden. Rough hands, soft lips, drugging kisses. Jasper pulled back from her. What difference does it make if it was me? He looked at her, his face inscrutable. It matters because I need to know if I have been with another man besides you. I need to know. She met his gaze, bravely fighting off the urge to cry. She had a right to know the truth. Jasper released his hold on her, putting distance between them. Bloody hell, Gemma. Fine. It was me. Does that make it any better? He crossed his arms over his chest and scowled. Gemma bit her bottom lip and blinked rapidly, hoping no more tears would escape her eyes. The moment they'd shared was over, and she had to accept it and move on. Thank you for your candour. Now excuse me, I have to return to the party. She tried to push past him to exit the garden shed. Gemma, stay. Jasper put out a hand, but she knocked it away. No, she gasped, her throat constricted and her lungs burned. I have to get out of this dreadful place. I can't breathe. Gemma shoved him away and almost ripped the door from its rusty hinges in her flight to freedom. Part of her wanted to never see him again. To her shame, she looked back after a few steps, but he leaned against the frame of the open doorway, not moving. He did not try to stop her. The other part of her wanted him to chase after her, catch her, and tell her that his promise to never let her go was one he would keep. But he didn't. He let her go, broken heart and all.